Good afternoon, members. I wish you a happy new year. And welcome to the meeting of panel on security. First, confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. Minutes of the meeting on the 5th of December last year were circulated. We have not received any amendment suggestions, so can we confirm the minutes? All right. Item 2. Please refer to the information papers issued. Item number 3. Date of the next meeting and items to be discussed. Please refer to the list of outstanding items and list of follow-up actions. On the meeting on the 23rd of January from 2 to 4 p.m., the Commissioner of Police will talk about the crime situation for 2017. We have another meeting in February on the 6th of February, which is a Tuesday at 2:30 p.m. and 3 items will be discussed. First of all, new arrangements for the notification mechanism between the mainland and Hong Kong SAR, and B, the crackdown on smuggling using airmail and express cargo and the enforcement situation, and C, amendments to the first schedule to the Dangerous Drugs Ordinance and Schedule 2 to the Control of Chemicals Ordinance. Any comments from members? If not, we will cover these 3 issues on the 6th of February. Last time, myself and the Vice Chairman met the Secretary and we conveyed members' views. Some members would like to visit disciplined forces facilities, and we suggest visiting a correctional institution. Some members wrote to us revealing that there are issues in some of these correctional institutions, so they would like to look into the situation. And B, the enforcement situation by the Customs and Excise Department on airmail and sea cargo. So these have to do with online shopping and shipments arriving from elsewhere. Sometimes illegal products might be mailed or conveyed. So we would like to know about the CNE's enforcement work. And C, the Junior Police Corps opened a new center at Pat Hung, and it is open for members' visit. And finally, members suggested visiting the Hailing Child Addiction Treatment Center. Since it would take quite some time to reach the treatment center, do members have any views on these 4 proposed destinations? If not, I will work with the Secretariat and Administration after the meeting and inform members of details of such visits. Item number 4. Fire Safety Improvement Work Subsidy Scheme. I invited all Legislative Council members. I would first invite the administration in before I invite members to ask questions, and each member would have 4 minutes, including question and answer. Members who would like to speak, please raise their hands. We have a number of items on the agenda, so I would be strict with time control. First up, we have Mr. Sonny Au, Undersecretary for Security, Mr. Terence Chang, Assistant Director of the FSD, Mr. Vic Yao, Deputy Secretary for Security, Mr. Daniel Ho, Director, Building Rehabilitation from the Urban Renewal Authority, Mr. Alex Chan, Principal Assistant Secretary for Security, and Mr. Kenton, Assistant Director from the Buildings Department. If members have any direct or indirect pecuniary interest on this item, please disclose such interest per Rule 83A of the Rules of Procedure. So I would first invite the administration to walk us through the paper before inviting questions from members. Would the Undersecretary walk us through? Chairman, members, the Chief Executive announced in the 2017 policy address that the government plans to devote $2 billion to launch the Fire Safety Improvement Work Subsidy Scheme, or FSW scheme, to subsidize owners of old composite buildings to undertake fire safety enhancement measures, and we seek members' views on the scheme. The Fire Safety Buildings Ordinance, or FSBO, has been in operation for 10 years, but the compliance situation is not satisfactory, and owners face certain challenges, including technical issues, costs, and the difficulty in coordination. For technical issues, old buildings often had difficulty installing service water tanks, and in the last 2 years, the FSD implemented improvised measures for different types of buildings by lowering the water tank capacity requirement. We would take reference from the URA's measures. For old buildings which have received fire safety directions, and if the rateable value falls beneath the threshold and have owners' corporations, they would satisfy our requirement, and fire improvement works would be conducted, and eligible buildings would receive up to 60% of subsidy. The $2 billion funding can subsidize about 2,000 old commercial residential buildings, and we would monitor the availability of eligible contractors, and the Buildings Department would have a set of objective standards in establishing the priority for funding. To ensure the proper use of public money, if buildings have not, for buildings that have not engaged contractors, they must use the URA's Smart Tender Building Rehab Facilitating Services to enhance competitiveness. And buildings would be registered with the Reno Safe scheme by the police, and the police would provide support hotline and information. And bid rigging would be prevented. The funding will be open for applications by the middle of this year, and the URA would have uniform procedures or practices in place, and that would dovetail with the Operation Building Bright 2.0 launched by the Development Bureau. The BD, FSC, and URA plan to begin promoting the FSW scheme to target building owners early this year to encourage owners to start the preparatory work as soon as possible. We are happy to take in members' views.
Anyone want to supplement? No? Now I will read out the names of members who would want to ask questions. Lam Kwok Fan, Pun Chiu Ting, Chang Chung Tai, To Kan San, Lee Wai King, Starry Lee, and Chow Ho Ding. And there are others who want to speak. Now, for colleagues working upstairs, would you please come down and indicate your interest to raise questions? The cutoff time is 3 p.m. Lau Kok Fan, 4 minutes. Now, thank you. Now, for this subsidy scheme for fire safety improvement, we welcome this because, indeed, for a lot of owners of flats, it is difficult for them to sustain this kind of improvement works. So the scheme will come in helpful. But I have come across a lot of old residential building flat owners. When they have received the fire services notification, it is not just because of financial situation, but also because of technical difficulties that it's presented difficulties for them to go about renovations. And there are a number of old buildings which have not been renovated in time is because of technical, financial, and OC organization problems. And also it is about the exorbitant fees of renovation works. And some of the buildings do not have OCs, occupants committees, and therefore it is difficult for them to do renovation work. For 3-story high, 6-story high buildings and their water tanks also an issue. Are there some solutions or measures which will further help them, please? Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Lau, for the question. I think the Fire Services Department will talk about assistance. Mr. Zhang, please. Thank you, Chair. We thank Mr. Lau for the question. Now, in implementing the law, we understand that for different buildings, there are some spatial or technical limitations. And therefore, with review of our experience in the past few years of implementation of the law, we have sat down with the relevant departments to look at technical assistance afforded to the old buildings owners. For example, the 4-story and 6-story buildings, perhaps spatially for them to install rather large water tanks would be difficult. And therefore, we have reviewed our experience in terms of enforcement efficiency and also the necessity of firefighting equipment and installations. We have provided flexibility for these 4-story and 6-story old buildings. If they install a firefighting system, the tank capacity had been slashed down from 2,000 liters to 500 liters. And a lot of old building flat owners welcome this new flexibility. Now, the numbers concerned, since we have provided this flexible approach, we have already received over 1,000 buildings. The owners of these 1,000 buildings are applying for use of this flexible arrangement. And in coming up with these new measures, it would help the flat owners concerned. Another question concerning the old buildings 2.0, Operation Building Bright 2.0. Now, that had already been introduced, and now you're coming up with another scheme. Well, the flat owners who have gone through Operation Building Bright, now they have to go through the Fire Services Department with a new scheme again. Is it possible for them to do the two concurrently? Well, Chair, Mr. Lau's point is valid. In fact, we have the intention of asking the URA to process applications in order to implement the scheme. So the two schemes, including the Operation Building Bright 2.0, will be implemented at the same time. Mr. Ho will further explain. Mr. Daniel Ho, please. Right. For OBB 2.0 and firefighting scheme, we will be publicizing the two together. And in reviewing the priority of the flats where there is OBB 2.0 application, we will prioritize those buildings. Now I'm looking at Chan Chen-ying. Chair, I'm looking at paragraph 3 there. It says that 13,000 buildings in Hong Kong are involved. And so far, the Fire Services Department, the Buildings Department have only inspected less than 50% or 30% of these buildings. Why is that? Is it because there's insufficient manpower, or because some of them have already been previously inspected, or are you thinking about also flexible measures such as bringing in retired firefighters to help with the inspection? Another question concerning the 2,000 buildings which will benefit. Now, in the past, you have already given directives to over 6,000 buildings, and I'm sure with the limited resources, there will be a competition for the resources. Now, it says here that there will be a scoring scheme. Is this transparent and open to the public? Is this about the risk level of the buildings concerned in setting up this scheme and priority? Mr. Zhang, will you be answering the question? Yes, indeed. Mr. Chair, first of all, in terms of inspection arrangement, it's mentioned just now by members why we have to go in phases in inspection of these 13,000 buildings. First of all, we have to consider, of course, the internal resources of the government and also market resources, in the sense that in that period of time, let's say, the technical personnel for buildings renovation and the professionals concerned, are they able to provide that kind of buildings renovation within the same period of time? And this is a reason or the consideration why we are doing this in phases. And we would want to, for every period, inspect 400 such old buildings. The second part of the question, please. Perhaps the Fire Services Department would care to answer that question. Mr. Zhang. Mr. Chair, concerning the buildings, we have a few criteria in their prioritization. First of all, the age of the building and also the time of receiving the directive. For instance, on receiving the directive where it is early on and also where the building is old, we will definitely take these into account. And at the same time, we will work together with the URA and the other departments to come up with a comprehensive scheme for prioritization and scoring. Ms. Chan? Mr. Chair, the scoring at the end of the day, is it going to be transparent? And that is to say whether the OCs would be able to see for themselves whether they will be included in the 2,000 buildings or at what phase will they get the subsidies. So the point is, Mr. Zhang, whether they will be able to, that is the OCs or the residents will know when they'll get the subsidies. Thank you, Chair. Yes, the scoring will be made open to the residents and also the public at large. Lam Cheuk Ting. Mr. Chair, thank you. I'm looking at the information. 6,400 buildings have received fire services directives. 142 have already complied. And now you are coming up with a subsidy scheme. And I have said this earlier to the department. There are over 100 buildings which have already completed or are in the midst of works to comply. And now there is this new offer of subsidy. Would this not be fair to these early compliant buildings? Because if you do not provide them with certain subsidies in the future, you do not have to count on people being early compliant, because the people would be waiting for further subsidies from the government before they would take any action. So if you think about the future, this is not to the benefit of the government. Would you think about providing subsidies to the 140 odd buildings, please? Mr. Chair, yes. We thank Mr. Lam for the point, and indeed this is difficult in terms of implementation, as we had explained to Mr. Lam before. Now, this subsidy scheme is something new. We would want to use public money to provide some sort of incentive for the owners which have problems with financial situations in complying with the directives. And the criteria is that they have received the fire services department's directive or have not started with the relevant works. I can provide some data for reference. These buildings that we're talking about, for those which completely comply with directives, are 142. For the BD directive, it is 130 buildings fully compliant, and for there are only 32 buildings which are compliant both ways. So those which comply with the fire services directives and not the BD directives, they can also apply to the subsidy. And for those which are complied with the BD directives, they can also apply for the fire services subsidy. Now, this had been implemented, the directives have been meted out for about 10 years, and it's been a rather long time. And in that period, there may be sale of flats, etc. So indeed, it is difficult for us to provide subsidies to the compliant building owners. Mr. Chair, I understand now. Now you're saying that for those which are in the midst of works to comply with the directives, they are also eligible for subsidies. Well, in that case, you're basically calling for the OCs to stop works and in order to be to qualify for the subsidies. Is this good for the public, please? Well, Mr. Chair, when the last year, 2017 policy address, that was a cut-off date. Now, before October 11th, the date of the policy address, if the works is not completed, they are eligible for applying to this scheme, and the URA will vet those applications. Well, Mr. Chair, if that is the case, in the future the government asks the OCs or flat owners to do anything, no one will take any action. They will wait for 10 years, 20 years, and wait for subsidies to be provided before they will do anything. You know, those who try to take any action will be scolded by other residents and owners for being stupid, I can tell you that. Think through it, please. Poon Shuping. Now, in the document, Mr. Chair, it says that the existing number of flats is 13,000, and you have already inspected 8,500, so there will be another 5,000 flats or buildings to be inspected. And of the 8,500, there are already over 6,400 buildings which have been issued directives. So I'm concerned about these numbers. Now, in paragraph 7, you say that the WSD has agreed in principle to the use of existing freshwater supply system and rooftop freshwater tank for firefighting purpose, and the FSD and WSD inviting suitable target buildings to join as trial spots under a pilot scheme to assess the effectiveness of this measure. When will this start, please? And whom will you invite to join these trial spots? And do they need to pay any fees? Second question. We know that flat owners, in order to comply with structural directives, they will have to dig into their pockets to hire structural authorized persons to give certification concerning the structures of the buildings. And this may present problems for the old buildings flat owners. Now, my question is, does this scheme also include such authorized person certification, please? Perhaps the FSD will be able to answer the question concerning numbers. Now, one number I would like to clarify.
The total number of target buildings is about 13,000, about 5,000 are commercial residential buildings, 3,000 are domestic buildings. We only started inspections on commercial buildings. So among the 10.5 thousand target buildings, we inspect about 8,500 target buildings and issued around 6.4 thousand directions. Mr. Chang, in the enforcement of this ordinance, we realized that some owners had difficulties installing fire service water tanks. So we have been working with the water supplies department to use existing service tanks as fire service tanks, and technically it seems to be viable. However, we have to make sure that the fresh water is not contaminated because it's used for fire service. So for the sake of caution, we launched a pilot scheme. We identified owners in about 10 suitable buildings, and they are happy to take part in the pilot scheme. So in the actual installation of surface water tanks, we have to see whether it's technically feasible, and after that we will extend the program to all target buildings. We have secured owners for more than 10 buildings, and we will launch the pilot scheme very soon. Mr. Poon? I like to ask about the professionals who take care of the structure. The BD would also vet structural or building safety. The time is now past 3 p.m. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I will draw the line. Dr. Chen Xiongtai, thank you. The FSD and BD issued directions to about 6,400 buildings, and only 32 have complied with all the directions, which is far lower than what you expected. So through the subsidy or FSW scheme, you want to enhance the efficiency. I think owners and owners corporations are more concerned about the subsidy level. In Annex 1, based on different works or number of stories, the subsidy level would be ascertained. But I do not quite understand the latter part. For a 6-story building, the proposed ceiling of subsidy would be around $470,000. How did you come up with this sum? Owners do not know how much funding you would offer, so I wonder how you came up with that figure. And sometimes quotations had been secured from contractors, and in some cases nothing had been done. So would there be any difference in treatment for buildings who have and haven't received any quotations? I'd like to invite the URA to address this question. Mr. Ho, thank you very much. As for the subsidy levels, we would decide on that with the FSD and BD. As the paper suggests, the level is 60% of the work's costs, and we are still ironing out the details, and they would be announced later. For buildings who are securing quotations from contractors, if they fail to secure a contractor by the time they found an application, they have to join the Smart Tender scheme. For those who have secured contractors, we would commission an independent consultant to see whether the tendering process complies with the relevant ordinances, and we would also decide whether the assessment of value is reasonable, and if so, we would subsidize 60% of the work's costs. That would be the subsidy ceiling. Details of the program will be announced soon. I have a follow-up question. In calculating the 60% of the value or the costs, you would not deduct the building subsidy. Would there be cases of double subsidy, Mr. Ho? The principle is that there should not be any double subsidy. Under OBB 2.0, if no subsidy was secured on fire safety, then they can apply for the FSW scheme. Mr. James Toh, Vice Chairman. The government is investing $2 billion for the public, and there should not be any criticism. But there is something I want to say. I want to share my views. First of all, what is the point of the funding? In the past, according to OBB 2.0, it was said that the workers did not have enough work, and another objective was to enhance safety for the public. So the main reason was that the workers were out of a job. For CAP 572, when it was passed at LegCo, I was here. We never heard that the funding would create a burden. If that had been the case, it might not be approved or passed. And at that time, it was said that money was not an issue because the cost would be shared among all owners. The government does not find this a great burden. And number three, from my frontline experience, we are primarily dealing with technical issues rather than funding issues. Well, if only 1 or 2 buildings are problematic out of 1,000, I would not argue with you. But this is not about the any technical issues such as the capacity and location of the water tank. The chief executive said she wanted to allocate $2 billion, and I was just puzzled. Mrs. Carrie Lam used to be Secretary for Development, and she should be familiar with this issue. No one ever told her that this would be a burden. So why did she decide to allocate $2 billion? For owners of old buildings, the old buildings are still valuable, and they are a form of asset, while when some people could not even secure a flat. Many people are very poor, and if you subsidize people who own buildings, it might be somewhat unfair. Some people might might try to stop me, and they think I should just shut my mouth and I should just let Carrie Lam do whatever she wants. Just now, Mr. Lam Chuk Ting said, in the $2 billion, you can help a few thousand buildings or even more in the future. Since the first 100 buildings did not receive your funding, Mr. Lam asked you to subsidize them as well. It isn't a lot of money. It's just 100 buildings. And your answer was no. So in the future, people would not be as obedient. And people might decide to not do anything. And the government might say that Mr. Ao Chi Kwong or Mr. Gary Chan would become chief executive. So long as you don't follow the rules, we would give you the money. So that would be a big issue. So if you decide to subsidize the first 100 buildings, at least you are staying with your principles, or else the public will decide not to do anything, so that they would so that you would give them money later on. Under Secretary, are you encouraging people to not comply with the building maintenance requirements by the government? As we said in the paper, we saw that the compliance has not been satisfactory, and we have imposed a requirement on average rateable value, which is quite stringent. We would only subsidize people who need financial assistance. Mr. Starley, Chairman, I've been following up on old buildings for a long time, and I do not agree with Mr. James To. The failure for buildings to comply with the fire safety directions is a long-standing issue. There are technical factors as well as issues with owners. If you say that money is not a problem, perhaps you should visit those buildings. Many of these buildings are inhabited by elderly people, and money is a problem. So I welcome the FSW scheme, and it would certainly help owners comply with the fire safety directions. The owners of old buildings have assets. Should the government subsidize them? We have been discussing this for a long time. And with a requirement on average rateable value, I think the government has struck a balance. A lot of owners of old buildings told me that buying the property or building was the biggest mistake they can ever make. They are unable to apply for public housing. If you actually visited those buildings, I can say that these people would have been in much better shape if they had applied for public housing. But they felt that they were able to buy an old flat or building, so they now have to take care of the maintenance. We are not talking about subsidizing big housing estates or luxury homes. I think we should get things straight. So we should know the situation. The owners of old buildings are mostly honest, and they are in a very difficult spot. So I think the government should continue its work. Apart from offering resources and technical support, there are two areas the government has not covered. In the past, for BD directions, the government can actually intervene and help, but for fire safety directions, the government cannot help. Well, some owners say that you can just take my lease, and when I pass away, you can take my property. A lot of elderly owners are very concerned. Can you promise not to sue them? So with such subsidy, of course, people would act slowly, because I hope you won't sue them easily. You should not sue the behaving owners. Because of the non-behaving owners, OCs could not be set up. So can you promise to follow on these issues? Under Secretary, thank you very much for Ms. Lee's questions and views. We will make visits very soon and promote our program to owners.
And hopefully, Ms. Lee, with your district connection, you'll help us with the publicity of the scheme so that there will be more participation. And secondly, Mr. Zhang will talk about the implementation of the scheme. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would want to say the following. First of all, we cannot, on behalf of the owners, install more to put in more installations, because they will have to do it themselves, in the sense that the piping will have to run along a certain alignment. They will have to make that decision. The water tanks, where should it be placed, will also be something that they can do it. They will have to do it themselves, because it will be difficult for us to do that for them. Well, you can go back and think about it, because this is about safety. If they invite you to go in and do the installations on their behalf, please don't turn them away. Well, Mr. Chair and Ms. Lee, in fact, we have been flexible. To give you some numbers, for instance, we have issued 6,000 plus buildings directives in the past 10 years or so. In fact, less than 100 buildings have we actually prosecuted. As long as the buildings are sincere in their intention to carry out improvement works, we will be flexible in our approach and attitude. Chow Ho-ting. Thank you, Chair. Now, concerning this problem, I think the principle and the line of thinking would be as follows. If money can resolve some of the problems, then let's resolve those problems first, which can be resolved by money. And then the other problems, we will go step by step. I'm looking at the document here. Some time ago, the government had inspected 8,500 composite buildings, and of those, 6,400 had been issued directives. Now, according to the government, the response rate or success rate is very low. Just over 100 buildings are carrying out works according to the directives, and there may be a number of reasons, financial, the intrinsic qualities of the buildings, etc. I'm sure the reasons are multivaried. Now, according to the document, it says that this $2 billion should benefit 2,000 target buildings or more. Now, I'm doing a calculation in my mind here. If this is the case, then earlier in the document, you also mentioned that in the past there had been some 6,400 buildings issued with directives. 6,400 minus 2,000 would be 4,400. My question to the government is, for these 4,400 buildings, how would you want to approach them? Because these buildings may be experiencing certain factors other than financial difficulties, which make it impossible or difficult for them to comply. How are you going to handle these buildings, please? Thank you very much for the question, Chair, Mr. Chow. Yes, we have issued directives to 6,400 buildings. Half of them, or slightly half of them, have OCs organized, and we can work on these first, the buildings with OCs. The rest of them, we would encourage them to set up their OCs with the assistance of their Home Affairs. And our target is that there are some 3,000 buildings which have been prioritized. And for the rateable value, some 80% of them would qualify. So out of this 3,000 plus buildings, 80% of them would be within the rateable value, and therefore that would be 2,000 plus buildings altogether. We will try our best to encourage them, and we will continue to monitor the situation to see how we can further help them. Mr. Chow, just to follow up on the question, the remaining buildings, as we have mentioned just now, because of all sorts of reasons, perhaps financial, perhaps non-financial, there are some objective problems, or the building themselves have certain particular situations which make it difficult, such as structural problems with the building itself, make it difficult for them to comply. Will you be coming up with further flexible measures or assisting measures which will help these buildings or owners of these buildings, please? So this is not just about finance. As Starry Lee had mentioned just now, you ought to be flexible with certain buildings rather than to just prosecute them. But that's one channel. But on the other hand, if safety is of the issue, would you actually step in? And that is, you roll up your sleeves and actually do the work yourselves. Can you perhaps consider this suggestion? Mr. Chair, thank you for the suggestion. We'll go back and consider it. Yong Hock Kiew? Mr. Chair, thank you. I'm looking at Annex 1D. It says that 1D, it says the building must have formed an owner's corporation, that is an OC. Now, I understand that OCs is very convenient to work with, and it is in keeping with the mode of cooperation in the past with buildings. But also, we have to consider there are buildings which may be old or well over 50 years of age, whereby they are not able to form their owner's corporation. Now, what do you do with these buildings, where these buildings are in lack of owner's corporation, but they need to carry out the works? Is there a flexibility or a fallback position for the department? Will you be financing the individual owners or assisting the individual owners, or you just step in and do the works first and then recuperate the cost from the owners? Have you thought about that? Mr. Chair, perhaps I should explain why we want to have OCs as the applicants. There are a number of considerations here. One, for fire safety works. Much of it is in the public area, especially for water tank installation. There is a lot of controversy over the installation of water tanks, and all occupants must agree, or owners must agree, as to where the water tank is to be placed, on which floor, for instance, where on that floor, for instance. So the owners will have to decide. And also there will have to be further maintenance after installation, and there will have to be annual inspection. So the buildings, all the owners concerned will have to band together and form an entity in order to be able to carry out this kind of work. And hopefully, secondly, we want to, through the subsidy scheme, even though it is just 60%, not 100% subsidy, but we hope that it will provide sufficient incentive for the owners to participate in the scheme. And before they can do so, they'll have to form the OC. And a further point, the Fire Services Department or the Home Affairs, we want to help the buildings in forming their OCs. And there are two schemes here. One, that there is the I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I'm so sorry. I understand all that you're saying and all the series of projects or schemes that you're about to mention, but I'm saying that there are actual and real reasons why the buildings are not able to form their OCs. Now, if you're of the view that the buildings need to form their OCs, there must be reasons such as safety reasons or potential risks. But if you're saying that you want to wait for the Home Affairs to step in and then this and that and set up OCs, etc., what I'm asking is that whether there are flexible measures to help these buildings. This is much like what Ms. Starry Lee had talked about. Yes, indeed, this is much like what Mr. Chow Ho Ding had mentioned as well. We thank Mr. Young for the suggestion. We have 3,000 plus buildings that we can work on right away, and we'll start the scheme first. And as we do so, we will take into consideration the 3 members' suggestion. All right, 9 members have spoken. I have not heard any objection so far to the scheme. I think we are in general in support of the Fire Safety Improvement Works Subsidy Scheme. If you're not in objection, we will support and pass this subsidy scheme. Right, that's it. We go on to agenda item 5, which is exercise on the Daya Bay Contingency Plan. Now, the administration on the 20th and 21st of December had done these exercises for Daya Bay, and we as members of this panel have also been invited to participate. On the 20th, we had 2 members participating in the exercise, and I would now like the administration to bring us through this exercise, and also there will be questions from members, 4 minutes each. If you need to speak, would you please first raise your hand? Now, Mr. Li Ka-chiu is here with us, Secretary for Security, and also Kwok Yam-yong Frank, Exercise Director, and also there are other, and also Ms. Young as well, and there are other exercise directors as well. And would you want to bring us through the exercise, please? Now, because of time, Mr. Chair, I think I will use a PowerPoint so that you are able to actually picture the situation. And I will ask Mr. Frank Kwok Yam-yong, who is the exercise director, to bring us through the PPT. Right. on the 20th and 21st of December, we have done this IRSM consultant-led exercise. I will be talking about their role later on. There had been 30 departments and bureaus and organizations and government entities participating. And on the early morning, there had been an incident at the Daya Bay nuclear plant, and the Hong Kong government had been immediately responsive. The security department, the observatory, the engineering and mechanical services department, and also the FEHT, and also there was the executive committee. Now, 9:30, the chief executive personally led the steering committee, and the relevant consultants' report and the exercise plans were looked into, reviewed, and it was triggered, the exercise plan. And here, this is the control room, as you can see, of the exercise. According to the scenario of the nuclear incident, we had 103 systems, and there will be desktop exercise. Desktop exercise means that there were no actual mobilization of resources in the exercise. It was through role-playing in the center, involving 30 departments and bureaus to participate in the exercise, testing the coordination and decision-making capabilities of the relevant entities and departments. We looked at the workflow. We looked at the 26 Emergency Coordination Center of the departments using different communication modes. In the 2 days, we had simultaneous or real-time follow-up and to monitor the exercise progression. In the 2 days of exercise, apart from the desktop exercise, there were on-site exercise as well. This is a map, as you can see. This is the map of Hong Kong. You're able to see where Daya Bay is. That is the nuclear plant. The red line is a 20-kilometer around the Daya Bay nuclear plant. And in this exercise, there is a particular radiation protection area. On 20th, 10:30 in Tongping Island, we had this evacuation plan, and this is a preventive plan, and that is before there is radiation leakage. The plan is carried out, and the 100+ tourists and also the residents of the island were evacuated to the Ma Liu Shui pier right here on the photo here. And there was a mobile MC center, monitoring center, to test for radiation among the evacuated people.
The MC can also carry out decontamination for contaminated persons. We also invited more than 40 experts on nuclear leakage, and we also set up an observation group to observe the exercise. In the afternoon, we visited the Ma Liu Shui Marine Police base, and we showed to the media and observation team the various devices and technology by the Hong Kong Observatory. And we also showed the deployment at one of the radiation hotspots, and radiological survey vehicles and helicopters were deployed. And at the Eastern Hospital, we tested the operation of one of the Emergency Monitoring and Support Centers, or EMSC, and we treated persons who were contaminated at the Meng Kem To boundary crossing point. We also carried out drills on various countermeasures on visitors as well as food and water. At Cyclone Swimming Pool, we simulated the decontamination of a large number of contaminated persons by offering counseling and showcasing our information on our countermeasures. For the French body IRSN, in the course of the exercise, they provided various training seminars and small-scale drills for the departments. They also offered expert advice for various departments to enhance their contingency preparedness. This was one of the experts of IRSN, Dr. Isner. On the 20th, he met the press and made the following remarks.
With a secret scenario is a standard used generally by major nuclear countries. Yes, I mean, I'm here to give a technical scenario to the Hong Kong government and to challenge them with that. And so far what we observe with my team, the performance of the technical teams are completely satisfying, yes.
Chairman, that's all for the briefing. Thank you. Anything to add, Secretary? I have 2 points to add. First of all, we incorporated experts in our exercise, and as the experts said, they conducted design training and also offered us some recommendations afterwards. They will also offer an overall analysis and conclusion. In terms of public education, three months before the exercise, in September, we launched public education. Together with the City University, we included information on the Daya Bay Contingency Plan in the Low Carbon Energy Education Center. So when young people took part in the activities of the center, we introduced them to our plans, and more than 1,000 young people participated. And subsequently, we launched smaller drills and exercises with schools, for example, fire drills, which are very common. And in these drills, we would seek to incorporate some elements from the DBCP. We would discuss details with schools. Members who wish to speak, please raise your hand. We have Mr. Ronick Chan and Ms. Elvin Young. Mr. Chan, thank you. In any contingency plan, exercises are essential, so I do support such exercise. We can see that such exercises are effective. The Secretary talked about enhancing public awareness on nuclear contingency plans, and the cooperation with City U is certainly a good start. In terms of enhancing public education for the contingency plan, I'd like to know how the government intends to further reinforce public education. We have conducted an exercise, but is there a website available where I can see the full details of the plan? For example, where can I receive information on water quality warning or radiation or ambient radiation? Would there be an integrated stop to provide the information? And would education materials be made available so that teachers can educate primary and secondary school students, just like earthquake drills? That way, students would know what to do. Thank you very much. And basically, we echo Mr. Chan's views. Our existing measures and ones going forward are very similar to what Mr. Chan said. The DBCP has been uploaded to the Security Bureau website, so the full details are available and you can download the information. As for the HKO website, pamphlets and seminars, and they would serve to educate the public on the DBCP in terms of assessment, countermeasures, etc. Information is available on these areas. From this exercise, we saw that media exposure served to enhance public awareness. On the Facebook page of the Information Services Department, some of our activities were reported, and there were more than 5,000 hits. And in terms of the hit rates of our web page, they doubled or tripled over the course of the exercise. So public awareness was certainly raised. So we will certainly discuss with schools on the production of video clips, teaching materials or kits, and through seminars we can try to incorporate certain elements in liberal study courses or curriculum, and we can also launch small drills to educate young people. So I think information is important. People have to pay attention to government information, and they should follow the government's recommended actions. The Daya Bay plant has a very high safety coefficient, but having said that, we have to plan for the worst case scenario. So for fire drills, we have to discuss with schools how this should be incorporated. Mr. Young? And my views are somewhat, or concerns are somewhat similar to Mr. Chan. And in terms of public education, while the government's paper did not mention whether any info packs are available, in other words, some simple infographics to educate the public on what they would do in case of an incident. If such kits are available, at least people would know what to do and they can afford to stay calm. From the Secretary's perspective, the SB website already has the relevant information, but in case of an incident, if you ask me to find the information on the website, it might not be ideal. Would the government register a domain or a web address such as Hong Kong Safety, something easy to remember? So in case of major incidents, and we are not just talking about nuclear incidents. For any major incidents, the public needs first-hand information on what they should do. So there should be an official website set up by the Hong Kong government. So this might make things more convenient on the long run. Thank you very much. Your views are certainly very helpful, but I think we are talking about two types of information. And they have been covered in our recent drill or exercise. One is public education, and two, in case of an incident, we have to manage the crisis, and we would not rely on our website in that scenario. the ISD Facebook page attracted 5,000 hits in 2 days. So where appropriate, we would disseminate information on Facebook. For the exercise, since time was limited, we did not go into details. Some of our, the public might have queries on certain information, and the same goes for the media. So it's about how we disseminate the information. We would use traditional channels such as email and fax. But when we have a crisis, we must reinforce information dissemination, and Facebook is one of our channels. And the Security Bureau has some apps. But apps might not be as ideal as Facebook, because Facebook allows two-way communication. So we are talking about two types of information. One, regular education, and two, for info kits. We did juggle the pros and cons. Generally, the public has limited knowledge on the impacts of nuclear leakage. So we must first know the extent of nuclear leakage. For example, the distance of the leakage and the extent. So generally, the longer the distance, the lower the radiation. So nothing is set in stone, because undue fears would not be necessary. So you might not necessarily have to put on protective gear and take medicine in all nuclear leakage incidents. So in terms of education, we have to educate the public on different measures. So in case of an incident or crisis, we can then communicate with the public more effectively. Ms. Odin Chow, thank you. As suggested by the paper, checkerboard 2 was certainly necessary, and through such exercises, the government's capability to handle major incidents is certainly enhanced. IRSN from France designed some side scenarios, and I'd like to ask about some of them. And for rumors with regards to radiation hotspots and treatment for contaminated persons, I'd like to ask about these scenarios. For major incidents, the biggest fear often comes from untrue rumors. So we must first eliminate untrue rumors. If the public is constantly misled, there would be even wider problems. So from this exercise, did the government have any experience to share on the on how to deal with rumors of radiation hotspots?
And also in treating contaminated persons, how is that done? I know time is limited. It's difficult for you to give us a detailed response, but if you can share with you some of your experience from this particular exercise in these respects, that would be good. Thank you very much for the question. Thank you, Chair. Concerning handling of rumors and panic handling, in this exercise, indeed, we have included these two. In our simulation, it is as follows. From different sources, we have received news that in location A and location B, we believe that there may be certain radiation, and or in an MTR station, there is a mob that's gone into, or a group of big group of people who have rushed into the MTR station out of fear that the atmosphere outside is contaminated. Now, we will then send, first instance, the monitoring vehicles, radiation monitoring vehicles, which will measure the radiation in the atmosphere. And then the Fire Services Department will also send a vehicle which is dedicated to handle dangerous products or substances, and also deployed in radiation. We send this vehicle out, and it is confirmed in the exercise that it is found that there is certain radiation and there is contaminated substances. In terms of efficiency and also the results, we will overall speaking, it is good. Now, there are, of course, some opinions and views that we have collected, and will follow through very carefully with those suggestions. Now, as for risk situation for dissemination of information, we have also tested the system for dissemination of information as well in this exercise. And there are views or opinions given to us as to how we can improve this further. And as mentioned by members just now, we will be using new media in helping with the dissemination. Now, the observatory and also the Eastern Hospital, they have helped with the testing of radiation. Mr. Ma will help with this regard. Mr. Ma? Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, during the exercise concerning the rumors for radiation hotspot, we have sent out the observatory vehicle to the hotspot concern where there is rumored to be radiation. We did a test of the atmosphere, and the result was found to be normal. And after that, the Fire Services Department colleagues were sent to the spot to test whether there is radiation substances. But in fact, it was found that it was just welding substances with very, very low grade of radiation. And therefore, after finding that out, there was dissemination of the relevant assuring information on television. And it was all done in real time, this particular part of the exercise. And we have local as well as international experts as well as the observatory professionals in working on this together. Overall speaking, it was smooth and satisfactory. Chen Chong-tai. Two questions. First of all, concerning the handling of rumors, as mentioned by Mr. Chow Ho-ting just now, this relates to the public, and we need to do more work in terms of prevention as well. Secondly, on the few days of the exercise, there were short films disseminated by the observatory, and there were certain responses because most of the buildings in Hong Kong are concrete, and therefore it is more effective in defending against radiation dust. But what about the buildings which have glass panels, glass curtains as outside curtain wall? Would these be less effective in the prevention of such radiation penetrating into the buildings, please? That is a genuine question on my part, because if glass curtain wall is often used for buildings, and if the observatory is grounded in its or reasonable in its claim, then would it logically follow that these luxury buildings with glass curtain walls will be less effective in preventing penetration of radiation? And compared to 2012, this particular exercise in terms of monitoring and inspection of radiation, perhaps it is more satisfactory, the work carried out by the departments concerned. And the Man Kam To Food Center, there is also a review of whether there had been radiation contamination on a cross basis. Now, for food contamination, if there had been inspection, then if it had been done, why don't you also do the inspection on water, like the Tung Kong East River water, so that it would not attract suspicion and worry about our water supply, whether it had also been contaminated. I remember there was a response some time ago saying that the water source is rather far away, and the is rather far away from Daya Bay, and therefore it's not contaminated. But still, why did you not test the water? Well, actually, the water radiation was measured for water by the Water Services Department. Yes, it was part of the measures in the exercise. In the soil, in the air, in the water, we did testing of radiation in all these media. And there had also been checkpoints at important locations. We also inspected or checked whether the water along its carrying path to Hong Kong had been contaminated, but it's just not been publicized, that's all. On Mankam Toh, I agree. For this particular round of the exercise, we want to find out whether there's any room for improvement. And the experts, after observation, they feel that there is indeed room for improvement. For example, the cross-contamination probability, how we can lower it even further. There are certain suggestions there, and it will be included into our future practice and measures. Third point, I would ask the observatory to talk about the radiation part. What would be the best way to shield from radiation? And different members just now had raised the same point, and that is in public education. We need to educate the public about the effects of radiation. Now, for Daya Bay, if it is atmospheric pollution and the pollutants float to Hong Kong through plume and through rain, through our modeling, by the time they arrive to Hong Kong, in fact, the contamination is highly diluted already. So using buildings to shield against radiation, we believe that the probability of needing that is very low. But of course, we will have to base our measures on the actual radiation intensity taken at the scenario. Mr. Ma, you will continue with the answer. Indeed, Mr. Chair, concerning the radiation and its relationship with buildings, if I can do some explanation. As Mr. Lee had mentioned, because of the distance from the Daya Bay, Hong Kong having to provide shielding measures against radiation will really depend on the actual situation. Now, for building as a shield against radiation, how effective is it? When the rain and fume floats to Hong Kong, the biggest fear is that there is inhalation of such pollutants. If we close all the windows of buildings, in fact, it would hugely reduce inhalable radiating substances. So whether it is curtain wall made of glass or concrete walls, it would have more or less the same effectiveness. And also, there is a exposure, the physical exposure to these the rain and also the plume. As I've mentioned, first of all, the fact that these reach Hong Kong in any intensity, the probability is low, and exposure is much lower in terms of risk than inhalation. So the buildings, by just closing the windows, would already be very effective. Toh Kan Shen, James Toh, I'm concerned about, in the paper, paragraph 12, I'm concerned about that. It talks about the consultant or the institute which will produce a report for the government. I would like to know whether this report will be made public. That's my point. I hope it will be made public. Mr. Lee, in this regard, first of all, we will have to look at the content of the report. For the majority of it, I don't think it should be problematic for making it open, but we have to look at some details. What kind of details would it pertain to? Right here, it would be too early for me to say one way or the other. But I would think, even before the report here, I would say much of it would be made public. And of course, we'll come to this panel of the LegCo to report on the findings. And definitely, we're open to exchange with LegCo members. Mr. James To, my baseline is very clear, my bottom line. I was being very polite just now. I'm totally not concerned with paragraph 13 onwards. I will take it as stated for now. But really, I'm concerned about paragraph 12, the report therein. If the report is not to be made public, then the discussion here will come to naught, unless we have the report mentioned in paragraph 12. Now, if Mr. Lee said that there may be certain areas or details which will not be made public, I think the public is exactly most concerned about what you will be holding back. Now, for Diabei, there will be this exercise for contingency plan, etc. At the end of the day, it is about what standards our government has reached and whether it is sufficient or not sufficient. That is the issue. If Mr. Lee is saying that there will be certain details which will not be made public, then I think this will, in the future, be the focus of all pursuits. That is, asking you to make public all the details. At present, I do not know what the Secretary for Security has in mind that would make him reluctant to make the report totally open. I myself cannot see why it cannot be made open. If the consultants think that there are certain problems with efficiency, and that is your department in the exercise had been deficient in efficiency, if there are such criticisms and you're saying you will not make this public, then I think that approach is very problematic on your part. Because at present, I really don't know why you harbor reservations in making it public. Mr. James To, I totally understand where you're coming from. At present, I have not seen the report. I will try my best to abide with your request. But at this point, it's too early to make a decision. Well, my bottom line is that we make this public, but you haven't said that you'll not make something or you'll keep something from the public or refrain from making part of the report public. You haven't said that, but you said that you reserve that possibility. I mean, even if making the report entirely open and therefore making people panic, well, still you have to do so. And maybe 2 years later, you repeat the exercise and do a much better work at it. And I'm sure you'll not be scoring 0.
I've heard Mr. To's views, and we are not trying to dodge from criticisms because the purpose of our exercise is to make improvements. And if there's room for improvement, that should be done. That is the whole point of the exercise. But I'm yet to read the report. So I cannot offer my stance at this point. But having heard what Mr. To said, I will try my best to address his points. In terms of the time frame, when will you receive the report and when will it be disclosed? I do not want to have to write to you every month. Secretary, first of all, they will offer recommendations and we would also consult the relevant departments on that. We will also likely talk to different local experts. I think this process will take a few months. I believe there would be communication and exchanges within the first half of the year. And I believe there would be interaction as the report is made available, and we would also consult other parties. But I promise to inform the security panel of the results, and by that time, based on the report, we can have a discussion. Since the report is yet to be available, we should not discuss now what to do. Of course, I understand Mr. To's stance, and I will do my best to address your requests. Finally, I have a few questions. As fellow members have said, Hong Kong people are unfamiliar with nuclear incidents. So in case of nuclear incidents or news of the Daya Bay nuclear power station, it might spread fear. Of course, we should not be too paranoid, but we should be well prepared. This is just like our terrorism preparedness. You told us what to do. So are there any tips for the general public on what they should do? And in terms of resources as countermeasures, for example, do we have anti-radiation masks or video clips? In Korea, at metro stations, there would be anti-radiation masks available in compartments. I'm not saying that we need to do the same with MTR, but for areas close to the Daya Bay nuclear power station, are these equipment available? In case of an incident, some people might be using boundary crossing point. Would there be any? Would any venue be available at our BCPs for a drill? In terms of public education, we will certainly design something more diverse. In our low carbon energy education center, we have incorporated some slogans in our guided tour. The slogan says, monitor, watch, and react. And the first part is to pay attention to news disseminated by the government. And by saying watch, we are asking people to watch out for what should be done as advised by the government. However, we should not overreact because that might create undue fears. And thirdly, we have a plan. The contingency would be shared in due course. In terms of publicity, we will proceed to the designing. And in terms of materials, such as masks and medicines, our protective gear are up to international standards. And clothing available commonly might not necessarily be appropriate. And according to international practice, the use of such gear must be based on the actual situation. The unnecessary use of such gear might create undue scare. And that is, if only a small group of people needs to be targeted, widening the scope unnecessarily would render the plan meaningless. So the dissemination of information and what needs to be done is important. And the use of these protective gear is often subject to instruction. For medicine, they should only be administered by doctors. For example, when someone leaves the area of a nuclear power station and arrives in Hong Kong, if we have a large number of such people, we would exchange intelligence with the relevant authorities. If this occurs, there would be a notification or mutual notification mechanism. We would also reinforce manpower at the relevant boundary crossing points and enhance intelligence sharing. In our current plan, if the local government realize that there is nuclear contamination, there are measures in place. We are referring to cases of unknown contamination or unprepared contamination, and our plan is to carry out tests at the boundary control points. If they exceed our nuclear threshold, they would be taken to the hospital. And the local government departments would carry out their own measures, and they would maintain communication with us while we carry out border control at BCPs in order to identify the persons that need to be treated, and our experts find this plan appropriate. So we have to carry out scientific analysis. Thank you. Finally, Mr. Ma Fong-kwok. Thank you. Sorry, I was involved in another meeting just now. We have another beyond Daya-based power plant. We have another NPS in Yangjiang and another which is under construction in Taishan, and phase 1 of the Lufeng nuclear power station is also underway. So would the government consider potential incidents at these nuclear power stations and how we would react? They are at a different distance from Hong Kong geographically, and technically they are also different. So does the government have plans on these other existing or upcoming nuclear power stations? Thank you very much. DBCP applies to nuclear leakages in different areas. There are several key parts to our plan. One is monitoring of radiation leakage in the surrounding areas, and 2, if the dosage or level detected warrants action, there would be different tiers of action. The DBNPS has an outstanding track record. And the DBNPS has a very high ranking, and it's 50 kilometers from our urban area. For the Yangjiang nuclear power station is 220 kilometers from Hong Kong. The Taishan NPS is 130 kilometers from Hong Kong. And the Taishan plant is still under construction. The nation has very strict standards on nuclear plants. The mainland is a member of the International Nuclear Event Scale, or the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA. And we maintain communication with the relevant authorities, and a notification mechanism is at the forefront. If there's any incident at any nuclear power station in Guangdong province, they would be covered by the notification mechanism. For non-emergency events, notification must be made within 48 hours. For emergency incidents, they must be notified within 24 hours, 2 hours, or immediately, depending on the extent. So the contingency plan includes this notification mechanism, the setting up of monitoring stations across Hong Kong, and the Hong Kong Observatory has 12 monitoring stations to monitor the ambient radiation level. If a significant radiation level is detected at any of the monitoring stations, the plan would be triggered. As I said, the effect of radiation is inversely proportional to distance. Radiation would be reduced substantially with distance, factoring in our distance with the plants and wind direction, with the exception of the DBNPS. If other nuclear facilities see incidents, the impacts on Hong Kong would be negligible. But the contingency plan applies to all scenarios, and there is a notification mechanism. And there are different tiers of measures. So on a whole, we feel that the contingency plan can deal with most problems. Members have spoken on this topic, so I'd like to thank the Secretary and his team. Next, we will move on to the final item. Item number 6, Government Flying Service Kai-Tak Division. I will first invite the administration to walk us through the paper before we open up for questions. Please raise your hands if you have questions. I would read out the names soon. So with us today, we have Mr. Sonny Au, Undersecretary for Security, Mr. Liu Chun-sun, Undersecretary for Development, Ms. Iris Lee, PAS for Security, Captain Wes Wu, Chief Pilot of the Government Flying Service. We also have public officers from the THB, CDD, and Civil Aviation Department. I won't read out the names one by one. Based on Rule 83A of the ROP, if members have direct or indirect pecuniary interest on this issue, please disclose the nature of such interests before you speak. I also received a motion proposed by Mr. Kwok Wai Keung. Since the meeting will last till 4:30, I suggest extending the meeting by 15 minutes to 4:45 p.m. in order to deal with the relevant items. Mr. Ao Chi Kwong will walk us through the paper. Thank you very much. The Government Flying Service is the only government body providing emergency rescue operations, regardless of whether the GFS will fearlessly reach places in need and offer efficient rescue, search and rescue, air ambulance, firefighting services, etc. Last year, the GFS carried out more than 2,000 operations and rescued thousands of people. And under adverse weather, the GFS mainly used the North Lantau routes for emergency calls. In order to dovetail with the development of the Tung Chung New Town extension, we would no longer be able to use this expressway. So we hope members would support the project or item so that the GFS can continue to provide search and rescue and ambulance services for the public. I would like to defer to the Undersecretary for Development, Mr. Liu. And the GFS is setting up a Kai-Tak division to dovetail with the developments under the Tung Chung New Town extension. And the TCNT is one of the key projects to increase land supply and the project will provide 49,000 residential units and 870,000 square meters of floor space, and the creation of 40,000 jobs. And the key is the Tung Chung East Reclamation Area. At the Finance Committee in October last year, the Tung Chung East Reclamation and Advanced Works were approved, and the work started at the end of last year. The first batch of intake would be 2023. I would like to now invite Ms. Joyce Lau, Chief Engineer from the CDD, to walk us through the details of the program.
Yes, the government flying service is under the Hong Kong government. It is in the southwestern tip of the runway, and it is responsible for a number of functions, including law enforcement and also search and rescue, air ambulance, firefighting, aerial survey, etc. And as we can see from the chart here, this is the route, the North Lantau Expressway, which goes through the Tung Chung New Town extension and also to the West Lantau corridor. And the expressway is actually exactly on top of the new town extension of Tung Chung. So as the new town extension is built, it would obstruct the expressway. In order to maintain the effectiveness and efficiency of the government flying services, the GFS's emergency services, under all weather conditions, we therefore need another spot for the site. The site selection for the division had undergone extensive search in the past period of time, and the site selection criteria would have to include operational needs, compatibility with aviation safety requirements, land use planning, technical feasibility, optimal site utilization, and compliance with statutory requirements. After technical feasibility studies, we were able to ascertain that the tip of Kai Tak runway is the most suitable location for establishing the division. And in the it is zoned as OU heliport. That is outline zoning plan. It is zoned as OU heliport. So this is a spot also for the planned commercial cross-boundary heliport. And the proposal now is a co-location with this planned commercial cross-boundary heliport. This is the location of the project site. You see that this is adjacent to the Kai Tak Cruise terminal, the park there. There is already 2,600 square meters space for future cross-boundary heliport being reserved, and there will be an apron built here, and this will be co-used by the commercial cross-boundary heliport as well as a GFS, and there is one that is specifically only for use of the GFS, as well as one specifically only for the use of the commercial cross-boundary heliport. At the same time, there will be a hangar as well as the parking pads and other air command and control center and ancillary facilities. Now, apart from these facilities, there will also be security and also other fire services facilities and other relevant necessary services for the flying services. And we have consulted the various district councils, including the Kowloon City District Council and other harbour and 3 relevant district councils and Harbour Fronts Commission, and we we plan to seek support from the Public Works Subcommittee for upgrading the project to Category A before seeking approval from the Finance Committee at a rough construction cost of $469.1 million, and subject to the approval, we plan to commence construction in the fourth quarter of 2018 for completion by end of 2020-21 to tie in with the first population intake target of Tung Chung New Town Extension in 2023. To provide the 40,000 units in Tung Chung is very important. We hope to have your support in this proposal. We have 10 members as follows who want to speak. Hon Kai-ming, Leung Kai-chang, Tan Man-ho, Poon Siu-ping, Yik Chi-ming, Mak Mei-kyun, Ma Fong-kwok, Kwok Wai-keung, Yu Si-wing, Lo Wai-kwok, Kwok Pui-fan, and Chow Ho-ting. Anybody else? I draw the line here. Nobody else want to speak? All right. So 12 members who have indicated they want to speak. We are going to extend our meeting further to 5 p.m. All right. Tabled is Kwok Wai-keung and Mak Mei-kyun's motion. This motion is related to our discussion topic, and this will be voted on by the panel later on. This is pertaining to agenda item 6, not 5, as mentioned in the motion. Now, first of all, Ho Kai-ming, 3 minutes, Q plus A. Now, for the GFS, we are always supportive because it is for emergency relief. Now, for this, the heliport here, there are dual usage, commercial as well as for the GFS. I think for commercial cross-boundary service, I still do not understand why it has to be set up there. This is in a very premium spot right in the center of the Victoria Harbour. Why do we have a commercial service set up here? Now, there are already the China Merchants cross-boundary heliports. Is it not sufficient? Do we really need another commercial cross-boundary heliport? It's close to Lai Kong Sing. It's close to the residential area. And also with the express rail and with the bridge connecting up to Zhuhai, do we really need another cross-boundary heliport in the Pearl River Delta region? I really question that. Do you have any data from the government to convince us that we need to build a heliport, a commercial one, so near to the residential areas, please? Now, you mentioned that there had been no objection from the district councils. I clarify, and on behalf of the Kwun Tong District Council, we have no objection to the GSF heliport, not the commercial heliport. This is really too close, 1.2 kilometers from the Laguna City and the residential areas. But we are very much in support of the GFS heliport. Now, who's going to answer this question? Perhaps Mr. Sunny Au. Well, thank you, Mr. Ho, for your question. We thank Mr. Au for your Mr. Ho for your support to the GFS Kai Tak Division heliport proposal. And Mr. Lau Ka-ki will answer the question. Thank you, Mr. Ho, for the question. Thank you, Chair. For the cross-border helicopter service, in the latest policy address and the FS address, it had already been made clear that this is a direction that we want to follow in Hong Kong. The Big Bay Area development and how Hong Kong is to link up with the other cities in the Guangdong province, we believe transportation connection is a very important element in that midst. We have maritime transport, and as Mr. Ho had mentioned, there is more and strengthened land transport as well. But for the Greater Bay Area, especially for high-end service development, helicopter is a necessary mode of transport. I'm sorry, time is up. Leung Kai-chang, please. Mr. Chair, a few questions. Firstly, For this high-tech division, what is the manpower allocation? Cheklap Kok manpower will be relocated here, or will you be hiring more hands? For example, helicopter pilots, operation, administration, manpower, etc. Second question, the high-tech division, the office, I'm not talking about the helicopter hangar area. The office compared to Cheklap Kok headquarters, how does it compare in terms of area for the offices, please? The third question, now you have made an assessment. I would want more information concerning that, and that is for the high-tech division, there is the helipad for fixed wing helicopters. I'm sure you don't need to place a fixed-wing helicopter here in the high-tech division here. I think that should be a correct surmise on my part. But there is no runway. Of course, a fixed-wing plane would not be able to take off. Mr. Wu, the pilot, Mr. Wu, would be able to answer the question. Yes, Mr. Chair, exactly. The fixed-plane wing would not be placed there. There is no runway, as the chairman had mentioned. So the fixed wing will be still retained in Cheklap Kok. As for the office area, compared to our Cheklap Kok headquarters, comparatively, the office space and our control center compared to Cheklap Kok would be about 10% or 20% only. Because for the high-tech division, it is very small indeed. It is only sufficient to provide emergency service needs, and it is not an overall all-purpose office space. As for manpower and deployment, with the funding approval, we will be seeking for hiring more people. And in terms of pilots and also in servicing personnel, we will be making appropriate deployment, and also we will be stepping up with hiring efforts and also training, so that the division, when it commences service, we will have sufficient capabilities to meet the needs. Mr. Chair, is there any plan to rebuild the Cheklap Kok headquarters? Because we see that they are already very almost to the limit in terms of land use. Well, no, there is no such plan at present. Thank you. Mr. Lan Kai-cheng has a motion, and I believe that this is in keeping with the content of what we're discussing now, and I approve that this motion be put to the vote later on. Mr. Tam Man Ho. Thank you, Mr. Chair. To build in Tung Chung, inevitably there will have to be a high-tech division. I think actually from day one, the GFS should be close to the residential area and near the town center rather than to fly from Cheklap Kok every time. It's rather unreasonable to do the latter. So I'm very much in support. Unfortunately, I'm not a member of the security panel, and therefore I'm not able to vote on Kwok Wai-feng's motion. I will object to Kwok Wai-cheng's motion. It says that there should be a suspension of commercial cross-border heliport service. Now, the DB is talking about Big Bay area. And this is about low-altitude flying of helicopter to Hong Kong. Now, this is about cross-border helicopter service. And for Hong Kong's development, in the interest of Hong Kong's development, you should not be opposing this. I know that the administration, the government, will do a study on the policy for low-altitude helicopter flight so as to accommodate flights from the neighboring Guangdong area. I think we should look at that policy report first to see whether this is indeed a right spot for commercial cross-border helicopter service, rather than to veto it now. And even from day one, this site was earmarked for the for heliport purpose. That is to say, in terms of zoning, it was a heliport planning site, and it is to be working dovetailed hand in hand with the Kai Tak cruise terminal to service cross-border transport. That has been from day one. And now somebody says they want to veto this, object to this. I'm not a member of the panel, but I hope you've heard me. This is Big Bay Area, especially the establishment party. Note that this is the country's policy. You're not against this, are you? You're not against low-altitude transport to the rest of Guangdong province, are you? I mean,
for the sake of Hong Kong aviation, there's no reason to stand against it. And I also agree with Mr. Kenneth Leung. The new division would require manpower and relevant training, so hopefully the government can enhance training. I think time is almost up. There's no need for a response. Mr. Poon Siu Ping. Thank you. The maintenance of around-the-clock service by the GFS and a new division outside of the Cheklap Kok headquarters is certainly worth supporting. Some members are concerned about manpower distribution, and we talked about the need for new resources for this new division. As you know, it's very difficult to for the GFS to hire pilots. So I wonder how the government flying service deal with the pilot shortage. You are spending about $400 million, and the work is expected to complete by 2021. And the hangar can accommodate 2 helicopters and the associated maintenance equipment. So by 2021, with the new hangar in place, would the GFS introduce 2 new helicopters, or would it be otherwise? Mr. Sunny Au. Thank you. And I would address this question before I invite Captain Wu to supplement. So thank you very much for your concern on the manpower situation on the GFS. When we look at 2016 to 17 and 17 to 18, we enhanced the manpower of the GFS. And the establishment made up 25% of our total manpower, and for the new Kai Tak division, we plan to further expand our manpower. In terms of the training of captains or pilots, I would invite Captain Wu to supplement. As for the new manpower for the new Kai Tak division, we will enhance our recruitment and training efforts so that we can maintain our service quality. And the quality of captains would also be maintained. So please be assured that in terms of recruitment and training, we would reinforce these fronts. The new hangar can accommodate 2 helicopters, so we would redeploy 2 helicopters from Cheklap Kok for call-out operations. In other words, there will be 2 less helicopters at Cheklap Kok. No, this is not the case. According to the paper, 2 Dolphin helicopters would be deployed for contingency purposes. There will be 2 new helicopters at Cheklap Kok, and 2 new helicopters would be redeployed to Kai Tak for contingency. Mr. Frankie Yik, I speak in support of this project. I also support the idea of sharing. Building helipads in Hong Kong has always been very hard in Hong Kong, so the current choice of site is appropriate. I understand there are concerns with the development of Kowloon East. So for the future expressway planning, we can do something to avoid affecting Laguna City residents. So the helicopters should not fly over residential buildings, and there's always a demand for Hong Kong, China helicopter services. And as Mr. Jeremy Tam said, with the Bay Area developments, the demand would only go up, so I support the project. I have a question, which was actually a question put to me by a reporter. And by sharing the facility with the private sector, would the government charge any fees? This has not been explained in the paper. I hope you can furnish us with further information later. So how would fees be collected? I'm sure you have to charge because you cannot provide the facility or site free of charge. Mr. Lau from the THB, thank you very much. We will make reference to the Shun Tak Center or HKCEC helipad, and we would learn from their mode of operation. The government would charge rents, so we would take reference from their practice. Next, Mr. Ma Fong Kwok. I have a few questions. First of all, I strongly support this new division in the urban area, as well as a cross-boundary helicopter base. And I see that it's not easy to find the right site. It used to be a very busy runway, so historically, I think the noise was even more serious in the past, so it is not a reason for objection. The division is not very large in scale, so what would it be efficient? And you want to build a new air command and control center, but you only have 2 parking spaces for helicopters. I'm not an expert, but if you have more parking facilities, the development would be much more efficient. Would you consider suppressing the floor space of the office building to in order to accommodate more helicopters? Your current hybrid proposal might lead to congestion, and demand will increase very soon. You are providing emergency services, so in case of emergency, would the GFS have priority in usage? And do you have any backup plan to deal with commercial aviation? Mr. Au, who can take this question? Captain Wu. Thank you very much for your support. In terms of the priority for emergency uses, the Kai-Tak division is expected to carry out first-rate response, and based on the call-out location, weather, and other factors, we would deploy other resources. If the location is close to Chek Lap Kok, we would deploy helicopters from Chek Lap Kok, and other aircrafts might also be deployed. So we have a flexible approach in emergency response. In terms of sharing the facilities with commercial helicopters, life-saving missions will certainly take higher priority. So the delay is a matter of 1 or 2 minutes. So after takeoff and landing, the operation of commercial helicopters would not be affected. So at the Golden Bohemia Square in Wan Chai, we have an effective system in place. Mr. Kwok Wai Keung, thank you. Mr. Jonathan Ho is not a member of the panel. He drafted this motion, and I propose this motion. Mr. Ho's concern is the impacts on surrounding residents. But in terms of the use of the waterfront, no one would object to the new division of the GFS. For emergency rescue operations, the GFS had done a very good job in the past, and I saw some very young technicians, which is encouraging. So we have no objections toward this division. But do we really need a cross-boundary heliport at that venue? I'm happy to hear that Mr. Jeremy Tam embraces the Bay Area. We actually have can have a cruise terminal already, and passengers would return to Hong Kong instead of returning to the mainland. So why, if there's such a need because of the Bay Area developments, why would you want to build a heliport there? If we do not have a cross-boundary heliport, can the public actually enjoy more of the waterfront? Mr. Liu, I will first address the question on the waterfront, and I will invite the THB to talk about the venue for the heliport. As for public enjoyment of the waterfront, when we planned for the Kai Tak development area, we actually considered this issue. If the area could be opened up to the public, it would be ideal. But meanwhile, it's very difficult to identify a site for heliport in urban areas. And at the rooftop of the cruise terminal, we have built a park. So in terms of enjoying the views of Victoria Harbour, it is possible at the neighboring runway park. So having considered all these factors and multiple consultations, we identified this site for a heliport. Mr. Lau, I think time is limited. Mr. Yu Siwing. I agree with this new division and its use as a commercial facility. With the Bay Area developments, we would see a greater demand in cross-boundary services. So cross-boundary helicopter services will certainly be the trend. When you look at the Bay Area cities and towns, there is a demand. Some people are concerned whether there will be too many helicopters. So with the apart from the GFS, what is your expectation of commercial use or demand? How many flights would there be every year? And would the usage cause nuisance to the residents? Have you conducted any studies to alleviate such concerns? Are the ancillary facilities to support commercial use for cross-boundary service? We might be talking about tourists and businessmen entering and leaving the BCPs. Are they going to use the cruise terminal or your future facility? And if so, would those facilities be included in your $4 billion budget? I would like to invite Mr. Lau from the THB to address this question. In the first quarter, we will launch a consultancy study on cross-boundary heliport services. This would study the demand in the next 10 or 15 years on cross-boundary helicopter services between Hong Kong and the PRD. So the study will be convened in the first quarter, and it will be completed within the year. And by then, we will have a clearer picture of cross-boundary helicopter services. As my colleague has explained, we will make use of existing facilities of the cruise terminal. The facilities have been entrusted to different government departments, and there will be more than 2,000 square feet of floor space for, or rather it should be 26,000 square feet of floor space for cross-boundary services, including lounges and other facilities. These are not included in the funding. So in the future, with detailed planning, we will come back for funds at LegCo. Mr. Lo Wai Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. The BPA supports this proposal. The GFS is the only public body providing support services in Hong Kong.
And other public aviation services. I'm sure the people of Hong Kong are very much in admiration of the service. And there are a lot of engineers concerned here. I myself am also an engineer, and the aviation engineers, we visited them last year in their Chek Lap Kok headquarters. Now, apart from the services that was mentioned just now, also in terms of aircraft maintenance, they also have a full and comprehensive team. And I've also, at the site inspection at their headquarters, I have spoken with their senior management, and I know that they are under a lot of pressure and limitations. We have a very busy schedule for flights. I know that apart from the work that they need to do in disaster relief and in saving lives, etc., other than that, for their training and other flights purposes, it's very difficult for them to find the space to do so. So that is why they need a division, and the Kai Tak division is an ideal site because it is at the end of what was originally a runway, and also it is, in terms of the zoning, there is to be this cross-border commercial heliport as well. I cannot think of anywhere in Hong Kong that is more ideal than this particular location, and I'm sure they have, in the administration has conducted extensive site search as well. So apart from providing the GFS an opportunity to extend their base, also I believe that cross-boundary helicopter service is also necessary. As some officials have mentioned, there will be further studies as to further needs. But in any case, I think it will be necessary to retain the commercial cross-boundary helicopter spot here as well. I don't think that needs any answer. It was an expression of view. Kwok Pui Fan, Mr. Chair, I'm also in support of this proposal. The GFS of Hong Kong government over the past many years have helped save a lot of lives, and to set up this new Kai Tak division here, I think is very ideal, because in the future, in their relief work in the residential area or town, urban area, it will be all the more necessary in the future. And the speed to the location concerned is important. But again, I would urge them to add more manpower. I also from my previous visit to the GFS know that there is a loss of talents, that the talents have been poached by other services and other corporations. How do we assure that the talents will be maintained? Mr. Au? Yes, Mr. Chair, I will answer the question and then the captain will supplement. First of all, in terms of the pilots of the GFS and the retention of such talents, we are very concerned about this. In management, we will be doing a number of things to support the GFS so that we will have studies. We have an efficiency promotion team which will be providing opinions and guidance to the GFS in terms of increasing their efficiency, etc. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the Chair and also Ms. Kwok for your support. A few things. First of all, as I've mentioned, in terms of hiring and training, we will strengthen that work. And further, we also understand that outside the commercial field is poaching pilots, and they have a lot of capability in doing so. And what we want to do is to recruit people who are really interested in serving the public. And the way we fly is also different from the commercial sector. And in our training, we want our pilots to understand that their service is meaningful to society. As for remuneration and welfare, of course, we will have to work within the policy of the government. And also, we have been proactively communicating with the department to see where we can have actual adjustments, have room for actual adjustments, so that apart from work and where there are typhoons and inclement weather, that the pilots and the personnel of the GFS will be able to have sufficient compensation for that as well. Well, I think you might have to stop here because of time. Now, Chow Ho-ting, Mr. Chair, I think the move this time is because of the extension of the Tung Chung town extension. There will be a lot of buildings built, and that affects the flight path of the GFS, and therefore they have to find another location to stay away from the major development of buildings and residential sites at the Tung Chung New Town extension. And therefore there is a need for finding this new site. I can understand that. In order to allow the GFS in the future to have a better site in its new site and to provide a better service, I understand that there is that need. But I also notice that for the arrangement this time, according to the document at least, the original zoning is also for heliport function. In the future, the GFS, apart from using this area, there will also be a cross-border commercial helicopter service. Now, when this spot is used in the future, I hope that the GFS will take precedence. That is to say, they will be given priority because they are providing alleviation and relief service to society. And I hope that this will be the arrangement so as to facilitate the work and the service of the GFS going forward. I would like to have a response from the government concerning prioritizing the use by the GFS of this area. Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Chow, for the suggestion. In relieving calamities and saving lives, this is definitely to be prioritized. In Golden Bohemia Plaza, we are also working together with the cross-boundary helicopter service, and we are very professional in our cooperation. There is no wrangles whatsoever, no difference in opinion whatsoever. Yes, also we will be putting this into our operation manual for prioritizing the government flying services. All right. Mr. Ho Kai-ming has a reservation concerning this proposal, but he's not a member of the panel. I believe members of the panel are in agreement in putting this to the Public Works panel for consideration. Now we have two motions here. First of all, Mr. Kwok Wai Kang, do you want to read out your motion? Yes, very simply, we support and recognize the need of the government flying service in setting up the extension and the Kai-Tak division at the tip of the Kai-Tak or ex-Kai-Tak runway. But we want to suspend the commercial cross-border helicopter service usage because of the noise disturbance to the East Kowloon residents, and also we propose that there should be a better connection with the community and also a better design of the project, and also to allow public space and for the public to enjoy this area. Now, we may have to sound the bell and we have to vote on this motion. If you're all in agreement, we will extend this meeting to 5:10. But if you're not in agreement to extension to 5:10 p.m., then we cannot deal with this motion. Any objections? All right. We will sound the bell for 5 minutes then.
All
right. Ho Kai-ming, Lo Wai Kwok, Tam and Ho. These three are not members of the security panel. Please do not cast your vote because they will not count. Now, later on, all we have to do is to raise our hands to cast the vote because we're not in our original seats. If after 5 minutes, unfortunately, we do not have the quorum of 13, we will have to sound the bell for another 5 minutes to summons the members, but we will not be able to vote on the motion because we have all resolved that we extend the meeting to only 5:10. 13 is the quorum for this meeting. Yes, we have a quorum here. But we need to sound the bell for the full 5 minutes nevertheless.
we will extend the meeting to 5:10.
你讀啦，我驚讀錯。嗱，遲入嚟嗰啲同事咧，請留意我哋嘅屏。
For members who just entered, we are now putting Mr. Koi Kung's motion to the vote. Please pay attention to the display.
頭先我已經批准咗話處理嘅，頭先我已經批准咗。係啊。舉手得㗎啦，舉手得㗎。
A show of hands would be enough.
我哋用舉手形式去投票嘅嚇。
We will vote based on a show of hands. 冇啦，費事啦。係，好啦，嗱，請贊成郭偉強議員動議嘅 Members in favour of Mr. Koi Kung's motion, please raise your hands. Those in favour, please raise your hands. Please raise your hands. Mr. Koi Kung, Ms. Alice Mack, anyone else? Those against Mr. Koi Kung's motion, please raise your hands. Please read out the names. Mr. Ted Hui, Mr. Siu Ka Chun, Mr. Ken Leung, Mr. Dennis Kwok, Ms. Elvin Yang, Mr. Ray Chan, Mr. Chen Jung Tai, Mr. Frankie Yik, Mr. Christopher Chung, Dr. Elizabeth Quat, Ms. Odin Chow, Mr. Edward Lau, Ms. Dari Lee, Ms. Eunice Yong, Mr. Ronick Chan, Mr. Yu Si Weng, and Mr. Ma Fong Kwok. You may lower your hands. Any abstentions? We have one. Dr. Junis Ho. We have 17 members against the motion, 2 in favor. I declare the motion negatived. Mr. Kenneth Leung, please read out your motion. Thank you. The panel urges the government to provide enough human resource support to dovetail with the setting up of the GFS Kai-Tech division. Those in favor, please raise your hands.
Please
hold your hands. I think this is obvious, Chairman. 17 in favor. Those against, please raise your hands. We have no objection. Any abstentions? We have none. The motion is passed. And this is the end of the agenda item. We now move to item 7, any other business. Barring any other business, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.